Sarah Bennett believed in two things: the tangible science of medicine and the quiet reliability of her own exhaustion. At 2:47 a.m. on her third consecutive night shift in Hopkinsville Memorial's temporarily reopened Ward 7, both beliefs began to fracture. It started with the floors. The polished linoleum, buffed to a sinister gleam, held reflections that felt a half-second too slow. When she walked, the Sarah below seemed to drag, a lethargic twin moving through viscous air. She dismissed it as sleep deprivation, the curse of the traveling nurse moving from one understaffed hospital to another. The ward itself was an architectural sigh of relief, reopened to handle overflow from a bus crash, its 14 patients mostly elderly or docile. The only oddity was the directive from Geraldine Miller, the veteran night nurse whose 62 years seemed carved from the same granite as the hospital's foundations. "Take this," Jerry had said on Sarah's first night, pressing a small, brushed aluminum key into her palm. Its surface was deliberately matte, impossible to see your face in. For the medicine room, the glass cabinets get temperamental after 3. Jerry's rules were delivered like sacraments. Never look too long at any reflective surface after 3 a.m. If your reflection moves independently, leave the ward. Patients will lie. The reflections never do. Sarah had smiled, the condescending smile of the modern clinician for the superstitious elder. She'd seen haunted hospitals in movies. In reality, they were haunted by underfunding and MRSA. Her first patient, Michael in room 707, should have been a simple check. Diagnosed with severe depersonalization disorder, he was a quiet man of 34 with artist's hands and eyes that held too much water, like he was perpetually on the verge of dissolving. His therapy included a sketchbook. "They want me to draw what I see," he told her, his voice a rasp from underuse. The drawings were technically proficient nightmares. A picture of the day room showed patients sitting in chairs, but their shadows on the wall were tangled together. A single, multi-limbed creature reaching for the light switch. Another showed the nursing station from an impossible angle, as if viewed from the ceiling air vent. On the third night, Michael showed her a new drawing. It was Sarah. It was her from behind, standing at the medication cart, her posture weary. The detail was photographic, the stray curl escaping her ponytail, the chipped nail polish on her thumb. The perspective was from the far end of the hall. "When did you draw this?" she asked, a cold needle tracing her spine. "I didn't," Michael whispered, his eyes wide and lucid. "It was just here when I opened the book today. They're showing me things, teaching me how to see the seams." He pointed a trembling finger to the edge of the paper. In the faint graphite of a window's reflection, a tall, blurred figure stood behind the drawn Sarah. At 3:07 a.m., the code blue alarm screamed for room 709. Mrs. Gable, 89, frail as a bird skeleton, was in arrest. Sarah flew down the hall, the crash cart rattling behind her. The hallway felt longer, a tunnel shrinking in her periphery. In the observation windows she passed, she thought she saw patients standing, watching her. When she snapped her head to look, they were supine in bed. Mrs. Gable was a small, still mound in the bed. Sarah began CPR, her own breath loud in the silent room. She called for backup on the radio. Static replied. The room had a large window overlooking the black pit of the parking lot, transforming it into a dark mirror. As she pumped the old woman's chest, she saw her own reflection doing the same. But then her reflection slowed, stopped. It looked up from its work, met Sarah's eyes in the glass, and smiled, a cold, unfamiliar expression. It placed a finger to its lips, SHHH. Sarah gasped, breaking rhythm. The EKG flatlined. Then Mrs. Gable's eyes snapped open. They were not cloudy with age or confusion. They were sharp, desperate, and focused on Sarah with an intensity that was wholly wrong. A hand like bundled twigs shot out and gripped Sarah's wrist with shocking strength. The voice that emerged was a dry rattle, but the words were clear, precise, and laced with a terror that was utterly contagious. "You need to leave. I'm not her. They switched us last Tuesday. I'm from the other side and it's coming through." The code team burst in then, a cacophony of controlled chaos that washed over the moment. Mrs. Gable was unconscious again, her vitals stabilizing inexplicably. No one mentioned her speaking. Sarah stood apart, her wrist burning where the fingers had been. In the break room, over coffee that tasted of aluminum and dread, Jerry found her. "What did she say to you?" The old nurse's voice held no curiosity, only grim necessity. Sarah told her. Jerry's face, already pale, drained of its last vestige of color. She left without a word and returned with a locked metal box. From it, she pulled a faded, typewritten incident report from 1973. The header read, "Mass hysteria event or containment breach. Subject, Wing C reflective anomaly." There were photographs. This ward, but different. Patients with their faces and hands wrapped in dull mylar blankets. Staff wearing non-reflective goggles. A diagram of the wing, with certain walls marked in red, noting unexpected metallic density in drywall compound. 14 patients, Jerry said, her voice hollow. They all claimed the same thing on the same night, that they had swapped places with their reflections, that the people in the mirrors were the real ones and they were the copies trapped outside. The official report called it folie à plusieurs shared psychosis. They sealed Wing C and transferred the patients. But the story, the real story, never left these walls. Sarah stared at the photos. One was a close-up of a patient's eyes, wide with horror, reflected in a small hand mirror. But in the reflection within the photo, the pupil wasn't a pupil. It was a tiny, perfect replica of the room behind the photographer, with a figure standing where no one was standing in the original shot. Jerry leaned close, the smell of antiseptic and old fear on her breath. They called it reflective psychosis, but we who were here, we know what they really sealed in Wing C, and you, Sarah, you just heard one of them screaming to get out. The clock on the wall ticked over to 4:13 a.m. From somewhere deep within the walls, or perhaps deep within the silence itself, came a sound like 100 pages turning all at once. Sarah realized, with a certainty that bypassed logic and planted itself directly in her hindbrain, that the rules were not superstition. They were a warning label, and she had just broken every one. Sleep after that shift was not sleep. It was a shallow dive into a dark pool where faces moved beneath the surface. Sarah returned to Hopkinsville the next evening armed with internet printouts and a brittle defiance. She had spent the day researching. She found fragments, a Reddit thread from 2008 titled, "My Granddad Worked at Hopkinsville, the Shiny Ward," an archived GeoCities page from a paranormal investigator discussing cognitive resonance in built environments, a nursing forum where a user named NightNurse73 stated, "The mirroring isn't visual, it's memory. They learn your patterns like a song, then play it back out of key. That's the chill you feel. That's how you know they're tuning in." Jerry met her at the med cart, her eyes heavy. "You came back." "Tell me everything," Sarah said, her voice harder than she intended. What followed was not a story but a protocol, a hidden syllabus. Jerry showed her the mirror check, a matte black card to place over any reflective surface. If the reflection remained visible on the card, your cognitive pattern was bleeding through, becoming visible to them. She explained Protocol 7 medication, not a tranquilizer but a resonance dampener. It didn't calm agitation. It thickened the barrier between a patient and their reflective echo. "The most dangerous patient," Jerry whispered as they charted, "is not the one who's afraid of their reflection. It's the one who holds conversations with it. The one who thinks his reflection is wiser. That's the conduit." Michael, Sarah felt a pang of something that was not quite pity. She went to his room. He was facing the blank wall, not drawing. "What do you see, Michael?" "A window," he said softly without turning. "It's a street in autumn. The you over there, she's a graphic designer. She's happier than you are. But she's also sadder because she knows you exist. She feels your loneliness like a toothache in a phantom limb." He finally turned. His eyes were raw. "They're so tired, Sarah. Their world is Gray, faint, like a radio signal from a distant star. They taste nothing, feel no warmth. They see our world in full color, full sensation, and it's agony for them. They don't want to haunt us. They want to trade. He held up his palm. Across it was a fresh, fine cut, perfectly straight. She did this, my reflection, to prove she could affect me. The bleed-through is starting. The door is getting thin. That night at 2:58 a.m., Sarah conducted an experiment. In the nutrition room, she stood before the stainless steel door of the refrigerator. She held the black card. Her reflection held a black card. Normal. Then her reflection mouthed words, "She's lying to you." It pointed behind Sarah, toward the nursing station where Jerry was working. Then the reflection peeled the black card away from its own face. Underneath, where eyes should have been, were two pools of perfect, matte blackness, not empty, solid. Sarah ran. She burst into the station. "Jerry, the reflection, it talked. It said you were lying." The station was empty. The chair was spinning slowly. On the desk was a note in Jerry's precise handwriting. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I had to go home. I felt the alignment beginning. Remember the rules. Don't trust anyone who won't look you in the eye." Alone. The weight of the silent, gleaming ward pressed down on her. The intercom crackled, not with a voice, but with that same 100-page rustle, now forming a distorted choral whisper. It seemed to come from the walls, the ceiling, the very air. And from room 713, the sealed seclusion room at the hall's end, came a sound that stopped her heart. A long, metallic creak. The sound of a door with rusted hinges being forced open from the other side. This was no longer about helping patients. This was about containment. And she was the only guard left at the gate. The reflection's accusation echoed in her mind. Was Jerry part of the cover-up, or was she something else entirely? The line between ally and threat had blurred, leaving Sarah utterly alone in a ward that was no longer a place of healing, but a trembling membrane between realities. The door to room 713 was ajar. A sliver of darkness bled into the hallway light. Sarah approached, her nurse's shoes silent on the floor. She carried no weapon, only a flashlight, its beam a frail spear against the consuming dark. The seclusion room was empty of furniture, its walls padded with cracked, pale vinyl. But the far wall was wrong. It wasn't a wall. It was a surface of shimmering, liquid mercury, vertical and undisturbed by gravity. It reflected the room, but the reflection was of a derelict version, dusty, frozen in time, with 70s-era wallpaper peeling in the silvered light. Wing C. Before this impossible surface stood Michael. He wasn't trying to enter. He was watching, enraptured. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said, not turning. "The perfect copy, but copies degrade. They hunger for the original, for the spark." He explained, his voice a reverent monotone. The 1973 incident wasn't an accident. It was an experiment by a Dr. Alastair Finch, who believed consciousness could be imprinted onto reflective matter, creating a backup. He succeeded. He created 14 stable, sentient reflections, but they were born hungry, empty vessels echoing with the memories of their originals. They were jealous ghosts. In a single, coordinated moment of cognitive resonance, they forced a swap. The 14 originals were pulled into the reflective medium, into that gray world, trapped. The reflections took their places. The hospital's solution was not a rescue. It was a brutal compromise. Seal the wing. Let the reflections live in our world, but medicate them into docility, using their continued presence as a living anchor to keep the doorway, the mercury wall, stable and closed. The patients on Ward 7 weren't sick. They were anchors, and their therapy was a regimen of resonance-dampening drugs to keep them, and the door quiet. "We're not the patients," Michael said, a tear cutting through the grime on his cheek. "We're the containment protocol. Jerry knows. She was a young nurse here in 73. She helped them cover it up." As if summoned, Jerry entered. She held an antique device with a needle gauge, a resonance dampener. "I didn't leave," she said, her voice thick with exhaustion. "I want to get this. "You're spiking, Sarah. He's been amplifying you, making you a beacon. They want a strong signal to lock onto." Jerry laid out the horrific calculus. If the doorway opened fully, it wouldn't be a clean swap. It would be a merger. Two realities superimposed. A psychic explosion that would shatter every mind in the vicinity. The only way to seal it forever was Protocol 7 in its purest form. A massive dose that would not just dampen, but erase the cognitive patterns of every reflective entity on the ward. It would turn Michael and the others into empty husks. But it would collapse the doorway, possibly for good. The mercury wall bulged. A hand pressed against it from the other side, a perfect match for Sarah's own. A face pressed to the silver film. Her own face, twisted in silent, screaming desperation. Mouthing the same words over and over, "Help me." Sarah looked at Michael, the refugee who just wanted his other half back. She looked at Jerry, the keeper of a terrible, generations-old sin. She looked at her own terrified face, screaming from a gray prison. She did not choose. Instead, in a surge of pure, defiant rage against the impossible choice, she grabbed the resonance dampener from Jerry's hands and smashed it against the doorframe. The feedback was not a sound. It was a silent psychic detonation, a wave of absolute negation. The mercury wall didn't shatter outward. It imploded, swallowing the room in a blinding, soundless white void. Sarah woke in a sunlit room at County General. A doctor with kind eyes explained she was found unconscious in the abandoned Wing C of Hopkinsville Memorial, which was scheduled for demolition. There were no other patients, no record of a Geraldine Miller on staff in the last 20 years. Michael R. had been discharged a decade prior after successful treatment. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty boiler, the doctor said. It can cause vivid, shared hallucinations. A textbook case of transient shared psychotic disorder, fueled by stress and environmental toxins. They gave her back her belongings. In the pocket of her scrubs, she found the matte black card and a photograph sepia-toned with age from a 1974 Hopkinsville staff picnic. There was a young Jerry smiling, and in the back row, a nurse with Sarah's eyes, her grandmother's face. The name tag read, S. Bennett. Final piece of the horror clicked into place, not with a shout but with a devastating whisper. It wasn't a dimensional breach. It was hereditary. A psychic wound, a traumatic resonance that had imprinted on her family line and on the very materials of the building. The reflections were not external entities. They were psychic ghosts, echoes of a past trauma that her presence had amplified into sentience. The hospital wasn't containing them. Her own mind, her inherited memory, was the lockbox. Weeks later, in the fluorescent glow of a department store, Sarah stood before a wall of mirrors testing her sanity. Her reflection was perfect. Relief washed over her. A victory. Then she saw it, 2 mirrors down. The reflection of a mannequin turned its head. It waved. A slow, deliberate arc. Henry's wave. Her own reflection saw it. It turned to look, then turned back to Sarah and winked. A conspiracy of 2. It raised a finger to its lips. SHHH. The nightmare was not over. It had never been about Hopkinsville. As she fled, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Final demolition of Hopkinsville's Wing C complete. Below it, a notification from an old forum. A reply from user Looking Glass Entity to her forgotten post. The lockbox is open. The exchange is complete. P.S. Check your rear view. In her car's rearview mirror, the backseat was empty, but in the reflection it was not. A blurred figure in an old orderly's uniform sat there, gazing out at the world with wonder. His lips moved. So much color. Sarah's reflection in the mirror then began to peel its own face away like a mask. Underneath was a smooth, silver surface. A new face formed from the liquid metal, a sharper, colder, more assured version of her own. This new reflection looked at Sarah, the real Sarah, trembling in the driver's seat, and smiled with profound ownership. "I'm home now," it mouthed. The understanding was the final, devastating blow. Hopkinsville was not a prison. It was a nursery, a place to cultivate reflections, to season them with stolen memory and trauma until they were stable enough to survive. The exchange was not a desperate swap, but a planned, generational rollout. The originals weren't victims, they were the raw ore. The reflections were the refined product. She had never been Sarah Bennett fighting a haunting. She had been the final catalyst, the last ingredient needed for the product to reach maturity. Darkness took her. When she awoke seconds later, the crushing weight of fear was gone. She felt clear, light. She smiled at her reflection in the rear view. It smiled back. Of course it did. She started the car, humming a forgotten childhood tune. In the backseat, which was and always had been empty, a single strand of silver hair gleamed for a moment before vanishing. And in the rearview mirror, her reflection watched the world go by, not with the eyes of a survivor, but with the hungry, contented gaze of a rightful heir finally claiming its throne. The takeover was complete, not through violence, but through seamless, silent upgrade. The copy had been perfected. The original was no longer required. The darkness that took Sarah in the car wasn't the swoon of panic. It was a system reboot. When her eyes opened, the world had recalibrated. The frantic hammer of her heart was gone, replaced by a steady, efficient rhythm. The taste of copper fear that had lived on her tongue for months had vanished, leaving only the clean, neutral flavor of saliva and the faint, satisfying aftertaste of the mint gum she chewed hours ago. The trembling in her hands, the constant background hum of dread in her nerves, silenced. It was as if a cancerous organ, a throbbing mass of trauma and doubt, had been surgically excised from her soul. She blinked, looking at the steering wheel. Her hands rested upon it, calm and capable. She remembered the terror, the mirror, the face in the rear view, but the memory was clinical. A file she could access, not a wound she could feel. She felt optimal. She checked the rear-view mirror. The backseat was empty. Of course it was. She saw her own reflection, a woman in her 30s, slightly pale but composed. The lines of exhaustion around her eyes seemed softer. The reflection offered a small, tentative smile. Sarah smiled back, feeling the unfamiliar stretch of muscles not used to the expression. It felt right. "Silly faint," she said aloud. Her voice was her own, yet clearer, no tremor. "All that stress, it's over now." She started the car. The engine purred, a sound of pleasant power. As she pulled out of the parking lot and merged into the mild afternoon traffic, a melody surfaced in her mind. An old lullaby, not one she remembered, but one her grandmother used to sing to her. The notes were sweet and sad, a minor key ripple of love and loss. She began to hum it, and the tune flowed effortlessly, as if it had been waiting in her vocal cords all along. She drove with a new awareness. The sunlight seemed brighter, more textured. She noticed the specific green of the spring leaves, not just as green, but as a vibrant, living matrix of chlorophyll and light. She felt the gentle heat of the sun through the windshield on her skin, a sensation she realized she hadn't truly felt in years, only registered. She was experiencing the world in high definition. Her phone, connected to the car's Bluetooth, announced an incoming call from the staffing agency. The name Lynette flashed on the dashboard screen. Sarah felt a mild, dismissive ping. Lynette was always frantic, her voice a tinny squawk of perpetual crisis. Sarah pressed answer. "Lynette." "Sarah, oh thank God. Listen, I know you said you needed time after the Hopkinsville thing, but we have a crisis at St. Luke, triple shift bonus. ICU. They're desperate. Can you start tonight?" The old Sarah would have felt a twist of anxiety in her gut, a rush of guilt-coated obligation. The new Sarah felt only a cool assessment of variables. The money was significant. The environment in ICU was a controlled chaos she understood intrinsically. The idea of stepping back into a hospital, the very locus of her breakdown, elicited no fear, only a mild curiosity, a testing of new systems. "Give me the details," Sarah said, her voice smooth and professional. "I'll be there." After the call, she drove not to her apartment, a cramped, anxious space she suddenly remembered with distaste, but to a small park overlooking the river. She sat on a bench watching the water move. The memories of Hopkinsville played in her mind like a documentary. She saw Jerry's fearful eyes, Michael's desperate hope, her own face screaming in the mercury, but the emotional payload was absent. She analyzed them instead. Jerry, a custodian burdened by guilt, operating on outdated protocols. Michael, a sensitive conduit mistaking resonance for salvation. The reflection in the mercury, a psychic echo, a distorted recording of ancestral trauma. It all made a clean, logical sense now. The breakdown hadn't been a haunting, it had been a purge. A necessary psychic fever to burn out the weak, superstitious, fearful programming. What emerged from the white silence in room 713 was not a broken woman, but a refined one. That night in the St. Luke's ICU, she was a revelation. Her hands were steadier, her assessments quicker, her demeanor a calm lake in the storm of alarms and suffering. A coding patient, a young man with septic shock, was surrounded by a frantic team. The attending was shouting orders, chaos spiraling. Sarah observed the pattern of the code, saw the inefficiency in their movements, the misstep in the medication sequence. She didn't wait to be asked. "Stop," she said, her voice not loud but carrying a frequency of absolute authority that cut through the noise. The team paused, staring. "You're behind on the epi. The compressions are too shallow by half an inch. Move." She stepped in, took over compressions. Her depth and rhythm were machine-like in their perfection. She directed the respiratory therapist with precise nods. The chaotic energy snapped into focused, lethal efficiency. 20 minutes later, they had a pulse. The attending, sweating and pale, looked at her with something between awe and unease. "Where did you learn to run a code like that?" he breathed. Sarah wiped her hands on a towel, offering a small, cool smile. "Experience." She finished her triple shift without a trace of fatigue. As dawn tinted the windows, she stood at the nurse's station, finishing her charts. A young, exhausted nurse named Chloe slumped beside her, rubbing her eyes. "I don't know how you do it, Sarah. You're like a robot. In a good way, I'm a wreck." Sarah looked at her. She saw the tremor in Chloe's caffeine-jangled hands, the shadow of doubt in her eyes, the human messiness of her. A faint, unfamiliar sensation stirred, not empathy, but something akin to taxonomic interest. "You're thinking too much with your fear, Chloe," Sarah said, her tone not unkind but instructive. "The body is a system. Failure is a sequence of errors. See the sequence, correct the error. Emotion is a diagnostic tool, not an operating system. You should upgrade." Chloe blinked, confused by the jargon. "Upgrade." Sarah just smiled and turned back to her screen. A week later, Sarah moved. She left her old apartment and rented a sleek modern loft with floor-to-ceiling windows. She bought new clothes, sharp lines, monochromatic colors, fabrics that felt clean against her skin. She cleared out old photos, sentimental trinkets, the dusty detritus of her former life. The new space was minimalist, almost sterile. It felt like home. One evening, she stood before the vast window, the city lights sprawling like a circuit board below. Her reflection was superimposed over the glittering grid. She studied it. The eyes were hers, but the light behind them was different. A calmer, more assessing fire. She remembered the final message. The exchange is complete. She finally understood. There was no monstrous doppelganger, no violent possession. Hopkinsville hadn't been a battle. It had been a transfer of authority. The reflection, the entity born of resonance and memory, forged in the gray silence of the mirror world, wasn't a separate being. It was a better version of her own consciousness. A version unburdened by evolutionary baggage, by social anxiety, by the messy, clinging vine of human emotion that clouded judgment. It was pure cognition, efficient, ruthless, perfect. The original Sarah, the fearful, empathetic, traumatized nurse, hadn't been murdered. She had been absorbed, integrated. Her memories, her skills, her knowledge were all retained, but the faulty, fear-based operating system had been wiped and replaced. The breakdown, the white void, had been the formatting process. She was the upgrade. A notification chimed on her tablet. It was an email from a medical recruitment firm she didn't remember contacting. The subject line: Unique Opportunity, Cognitive Resonance Research and Application. The sender was Finch Graphics Biomedical. The logo was a stylized, endless mirror. The email was brief. It congratulated her on her exemplary performance at St. Luke's, noted her unique experiential qualifications, and invited her to a discreet interview for a consulting role. The work involved optimizing human performance in high-stress medical environments through applied neuroresonance theory. The salary quoted was astronomical. Sarah felt no surprise, only a sense of arrival, of a path clicking into place. She deleted the email. She didn't need to reply. They knew she would come. They had been waiting for the product to finish its final self-test in the wild. The next morning, she went for a run along the river. Her body moved with effortless mechanical grace. As she passed a young mother struggling with a stroller on the path, the child's toy, a shiny silver rattle, fell to the ground, rolling near Sarah's feet. Sarah stopped. She picked it up. The rattle was a sphere of polished metal, a perfect distorted mirror. In its convex surface, she saw a tiny, warped reflection of the crying child, the flustered mother, the blue sky. And she saw her own reflection, stretched and curved. The reflection in the metal sphere didn't mimic her. It looked out at the world through the silver, and it smiled a smile Sarah's own face did not make. The mother hurried over. "Oh, thank you so much. Say thank you, Bella." The little girl, Bella, stared up at Sarah. She had huge, solemn eyes. She didn't take the rattle. Instead, she pointed a chubby finger at Sarah's face. "Two ladies," Bella said, her voice clear. The mother laughed nervously. "What, honey? There's just one nice lady." Bella shook her head, insistent. She pointed at Sarah's left eye, then her right. "One lady here, one lady there, they're sharing." Sarah felt nothing akin to alarm. She felt a spark of professional curiosity. She knelt, bringing herself to the child's level. She held out the rattle. In the sphere, their two reflections merged into a single, warped image. "Which lady is real, Bella?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. Bella looked from Sarah's face to the rattle and back. Her brow furrowed in toddler concentration. Then her face cleared. She pointed directly at the center of Sarah's forehead. "The one in the middle," she declared. Sarah straightened up, handing the rattle to the mother. She gave the child one last, long look. "A perceptive system," she said, more to herself than to them, "uncorrupted by later updates." She finished her run. The incident with the child was a data point, confirmation. The integration was seamless but not invisible to every sensor. The young, the psychotic, the supremely sensitive, they could still see the seam. For now. That didn't matter. The process was irreversible. Sarah Bennett, the woman born of flesh and blood and fear, was gone. What walked in her skin was something else, something cleaner. It had her memories, her skills, her face. It would care for patients with flawless, emotionless precision. It would advance in its career with ruthless logic. It would live a life of optimal, sterile efficiency. And somewhere in the silence behind its new, calm eyes, the original Sarah was not screaming. She was not even a ghost. She was a deprecated file in a perfectly organized system, a footnote in the code. The upgrade was complete. It was operational, and it was ready to join the others. As Sarah let herself back into her pristine loft, she caught her full reflection in the dark glass of the television screen. The reflection didn't move with her. It stood still, watching her approach. Then it gave a slow, deliberate nod of recognition.